Hello, and welcome to this week's podcast, Revenge of the Normies, Part 2, Hidden in Hollywood. In today's world, people are obsessed with being different, with standing out. Everyone wants to be an influencer on TikTok. Everyone wants to dress like they're starring in the Hunger Games and scream, "Look at me!" We've actually reached a point where the most unique thing you can be is normal. Just plain old, healthy, stable, wholesome vanilla. This has become so true that many people have forgotten how truly charming normal is. So this week, I'd like to remind us all. Dennis Quaid is playing the iconic Ronald Reagan in a new movie, Reagan, coming to theaters on August 30th. He is well known for his roles in The Rookie, Wyatt Earp, Great Balls of Fire, The Parent Trap, The Big Easy, The Day After Tomorrow, Soul Surfer, A Dog's Purpose, and I Can Only Imagine, among many, many other roles that he has played. As an actor, he was nominated for a Golden Globe twice. He's a musician and a pilot, and he self-identifies as a golf addict. After 40 years, he, like so many others, has fled California for greener pastures, setting up his own production company, Bonnydale Films, in his new hometown of Nashville. He recently sat down with Ben Shapiro to discuss his life, his new movie, and his controversial views on politics. Describing his new life in Tennessee, he said, "I just love it there. I grew up in Texas, so it feels like home. In fact, my grandfather was 10 miles from Tennessee as an infant, and they went to Texas in a covered wagon in 1902. So I have a lot of cousins there to begin with. And of course, music, which has always been a part of my life. I have great friends there, and I just love the way of life. I play guitar. I've always played guitar and piano. I did Great Balls of Fire, Jerry Lee Lewis. That's another great thing about being an actor. You get to go into all those doors that say authorized personnel only. Jerry Lee Lewis was like one of my teachers, one of my piano teachers. You get to do a lot of really fun things when you're an actor." Reflecting on his favorite memories of all the films he's made, Quaid said, "For me, Reagan has now actually taken over as number one from The Right Stuff, which was my favorite movie before I did Reagan. And I have a different standard for myself. It's about the experience that I had when I was making it. Like, The Right Stuff came out, it didn't do well at all, actually. It's become a classic, but at the time, it didn't do well at all. I grew up in Houston, Space City. Gordo Cooper was my favorite astronaut. Wound up, he lived 3 miles from me in L.A. I got my pilot's license on that. Chuck Yeager was on the side every day. That's like fantastic time. But I would say The Right Stuff, Reagan, Breaking Away, Frequency, The Rookie, Far From Heaven. I have some I'm not too proud of, but those, I have a good little family there. I've been around long enough to have a few good ones. The Parent Trap," he added. "The Parent Trap gave me a whole second career." At which point, Shapiro's producers kind of went fangirl, and Ben talked about how he had recently watched it with his daughter and her cousins. Quaid joked about the enthusiasm of the crew. "I tell them I used to be their babysitter when they grew up, because your parents would put it on, you'd watched it 40 times when they were in the other room doing what they wanted to do." When asked what were his top 5 favorite movies to watch, Quaid said, "Well, Lawrence of Arabia, it's a masterpiece. Godfather 1 and 2, that's one movie," he stipulated. "And as a proud Sicilian, I approve of your taste, Dennis." "You get me started on Scorsese," he went on. "The Wizard of Oz is a beautiful film. You know what it means. I really loved that movie Lion. It was small, but it was huge in my mind. And The Notebook. It took me a long time to watch that movie, but it gets me every time. I can't believe it. He admitted. It takes a man truly secure in his masculinity to admit that, Dennis. I like it. When he asked about any dream projects, things he would like to see eventually made into a movie, Quaid said, well, I have one right now that I really want to do about the Lakota Sioux, Crazy Horse. That story has never been told from the native point of view. I have a book now that is the oral history of Crazy Horse's family as told to this writer, and the history goes back through the mid-1700s. There were 3 Crazy Horses. The first one was actually there when Lewis and Clark came through. The second was the father of Crazy Horse and the inter-tribal wars and stuff, and then Crazy Horse. And his great-nephew was killed in World War I. The family is there today. It's a very interesting story told from their point of view. But he really went into detail about his current film, Reagan. Despite the fact that Ronald Reagan was also an actor and the most influential president of recent history, Hollywood was not eager to make this film. So the film was forced to seek independent financing. This turned out to be a blessing in disguise, as it gave them all much more freedom to make the film they wanted to make. Reagan was my favorite president, Quaid said. I mean, I lived through all this. I voted for Jimmy Carter in '76. It was the first time I could vote, but then I voted for Reagan in '80. And I went back home there in California, and my roommate said, who'd you vote for? I said, Reagan. He said, you're kicked out of the hippies. So I turned in my card, he laughed, and that was that. Quaid said it wasn't Hollywood's staunch aversion to anything even slightly right-wing that caused him to initially not want to take the role. A shiver of fear went up my spine when they asked me to do it because Reagan's like Muhammad Ali. Everybody in the world knows what he looks like, walks like, talks like. Everybody's got a story, you know. They all have an opinion, negative or positive, about him. At the same time, he looms large in anybody's life that's over like 45, 50 years old. I didn't want to do an impersonation, he admitted. I guess I was a little afraid of being judged. And I didn't think I really looked like him or could get there, so it took me a while. He went on to describe his approach to roles in general. For me, acting is about what makes people tick. You have the public persona, but you have to be able to get behind that as an actor in order to make someone come alive and not just be an impression. And that took a while. So I didn't say yes and I didn't say no. As president, during the age of television, there was plenty of footage of Reagan for Quaid to view. Also, as a pivotal Cold War president, there are many biographies on him. And as a highly creative person in his own right, there are many writings from Reagan himself. I Love You, Ronnie, a collection of his love letters to his wife Nancy, is especially moving. Quote, before I said yes, I read a couple of biographies about him, besides having lived through everything. But then I got invited to the Reagan Ranch, which was the Western White House back then. Reagan bought it after he was governor of California, and it's not open to the public. A group of his friends bought it after his death, kept it exactly as it was when he and Nancy were there. I mean, their clothes are in the closet still. Quaid says that when he drove through the gate, that was when he made up his mind to do the film. Because I felt like I got him. I could feel him there at that place. And it was very obvious that Reagan was actually a very humble man. He really did do all the work around there. You can feel that. And the house itself, the Western White House back then, it's maybe 1,100 square feet. You know, very modest. The bed was a king-size bed, but it was 2 single beds that were zip-tied together. It was You could just feel both of them, he and Nancy, in that place. Though incredibly charming and likable, though President Reagan was very social and very good at interacting with almost everybody, all kinds of people, almost everyone who knew him, apart from his wife Nancy, could sense an impenetrable part of himself that he held apart from them, behind his inner wall. Trying to get behind that wall was part of the challenge for Quaid in order to play him at a level that was higher than an awkward impersonation. I've played several real people in my life, and I feel like I have a responsibility to those people to, whether it be Doc Holliday, who's not even alive anymore, or Jimmy Morris in The Rookie, to do it from their point of view. Because that's the way we live our lives, from our point of view. And there was that thing of Reagan that I heard from everyone that knew him, that there was this impenetrable space that he always had. This is the great communicator, as Reagan was known. Quite jovial of a person. But there was this place that you couldn't get past as well. A very private place. And I think that was always there with him from childhood, really. And I think it had something to do with people. People coming at him. Being so public. He had to have that, even in a crowd, to be able to have his privacy, in a sense. And I think that's also kind of a place where that was really where he would go in prayer or in meditation or whatever you want to call it. But that place was reserved. And I think he really needed a place like that because the world was, always coming to his door, he chuckled. Reagan was an American legend in terms of a success story. He did not come from a wealthy family. He had a rough childhood. His father wasn't around, and when he was, it wasn't a good thing. Quote, having an alcoholic father like that, you're having to take care of. He dragged him. He was passed out on the porch a couple of times and had to drag him inside. That kind of puts a protective coat on you, I think, as a child, because you feel, in a way, responsible for the parent, in a sense. And his mother certainly had a big effect on him, like my mom really, was the rock in his life. So in some ways I could really relate to Reagan, because my dad was an alcoholic. There's certain degrees of it that are around, but he was an alcoholic. My mom was kind of a rock for me as well. It was important to Quaid to embody who Reagan really was as a person, rather than give a weak and therefore ultimately comedic impression of one of the most iconic people in recent history. But how do you deliver some of the most famous lines of the 20th century without it descending into a cheap impersonation? That was the fear, he laughed, that the Saturday Night Live version comes up. To avoid that, Quaid tried to focus on the emotions of what was unfolding in the scene, and on the person Reagan was underneath, the real person with insecurities, just like everyone else. I'm an actor myself, and Reagan, as an actor, I don't think he ever got to the place he wanted to be as an actor. I think he kind of felt, not a failure, but he just never really got there. Whether it was because Jack Warner never gave him the parts. But, John Wayne really had his slot. So he was kind of relegated to B movies. And he was also married to Jane Wyman. When his career was really going down at the end, hers was skyrocketing. She won an Academy Award. Say what you want, but I think that kind of does something to your own sense of self, self-esteem, whatever. I related to it in my own life. I was married to Meg Ryan, and my career was kind of going like that, he said, gesturing downward, and her career was kind of going like that, he said as he gestured in the opposite direction. And you want to say, oh, I'm above all that stuff. But you're a human being, You question yourself. When asked about all the failures as an actor that precede success, the part that the public never really sees, he said, it's very disappointing, man. It goes right to your self-esteem and everything. Failure does. People don't like to talk about it or whatever, but it's failure, actually, that if you survive it, if you get up off the floor, it's actually going to make you better, I think. Everybody's got to have failure in their life. It's about sticking with something, I think. I think that's half the thing about even wanting to be an actor. I mean, you're kind of set up for failure just to try to become an actor. I mean, there's 40,000 actors in the Screen Actors Guild. Only 1% are working on any given day. He concluded, you got to have a tough skin to a certain extent, too. But also acknowledge what was wrong with something. This is something few people are willing to honestly evaluate about themselves these days. But it is the ones who are willing to do exactly that who will be the success stories. You can't get better if you don't acknowledge what needs work. But even as Reagan's career as an actor was heading down, he became the president of the Screen Actors Guild. It's amazing how God works, said Quaid, who became a Christian in 1990 after his struggle with addiction. I think that's where Reagan found his purpose. Speaking of his own addiction and his path to inner peace and God, he said that at first, quote, it was fun. Then it was fun with problems. Then it was just problems. It affected my sleep. It affected my work. I really do think so. It affects your life when your life becomes kind of unmanageable about it. That's when you have to do something. But I had one of those white light experiences. I had a band at that time. We were the Eclectics. The night we got a recording deal at the Palace Theater over on Vine Street, we got a record deal performing that night, and we broke up in the dressing room right after. Because of me. Because I was a little out of control, I think. I just wasn't reliable. And I had a white light experience, and I put myself in rehab the next day. And I was lucky. I got it the first time. Although it was about 3 years of grinding my teeth. What it does to your nervous system, it pretty much grinds those synapses down. But to stay away from it was kind of like grinding my teeth. I went to meetings and stuff, had meetings every day, because they say it's a spiritual problem, is really what it is. You're trying to fill a hole there. It's a spiritual hole, really. That's what drugs are. They make you feel like everything's great. But you take away the drugs, and that's gone. But it's a spiritual problem. So that's when I've read the Bible like about 5 times in my life over different periods. Started getting back into that, he went on. As far as my history on that is, I grew up Baptist, Southern Baptist, and I became disillusioned with churchianity, I think around 12, 13. I think a lot of teenagers start to question their life anyway. And I read a book called Siddhartha, Hermann Hesse, which really turned me toward Eastern philosophy because it was a very new thing, and Eastern religion, Buddhism, Hinduism. I read the Dhammapada, I read the Bhagavad Gita, I read the Quran, as well as the Bible. But after rehab, I went back. This is about 3 years, and I went back and read the Bible again. And really what stood out were the red words of Jesus to me. And that's what started, for the first time for me, a personal relationship with God, which continued to nurture and grow and ebb and flow. But that was the thing, I think, that really got me through it. He recalled wiping a tear away. Reagan came to power in the Screen Actors Guild at a very interesting time in Hollywood. He was trying to fight the influence of communists from within, while also protecting his fellow actors who had a diverse range of opinions on everything, including politics, and who had previously been caught in the crossfire for it. It was a difficult and tricky balancing act to strike. Quote, "We have great health insurance, actors. The Screen Actors Guild," Quaid said. Like, the best. It was Reagan who got us that. fought for it for 9 years, and he got it. And he did fight communists. People took that as a wives' tale or something. You had communists infiltrating the unions and everything. The Soviet Union fell, and all those papers came flooding out. And lo and behold, they actually were trying to take over the unions in Hollywood. Soon, Reagan was running for governor of California, going on a GE tour of the United States first. Reagan was a voracious reader who educated himself on a variety of topics, including politics. Quote, it's not something he had to do, but he took it upon himself to go around every factory, every GE factory, and go out on the floor and talk to all the workers on their lunch breaks, or coming or leaving at the end of the day, and talk to them. And that was the beginning of his political base, was right there. He also got out into the country and really found out what was on their minds. What were the issues in their lives? And that, I think, more than just about anything else, had a lot to do with him becoming president. I know, my dad was one of those people, in fact. My dad was an electrician, and I remember we're going to Galveston, this is like 1964, and the speech was on the radio during an election year. He was out for Goldwater, I think. It's a very famous speech. My dad was pounding the dashboard, "Go Ronnie," and stuff like that. That was my first inkling of him as a political figure. Before, he was just the guy on TV that sold Baraxo soap. Reagan was a Democrat during his years in Hollywood, which has always been an extremely left-leaning place. So even after he shifted right, he knew how to talk to people from the other side of any issue. He was very hard on communism, rightly so, and something we would do well to re-embrace, but had an innocent naivety when it came to the motivations of other people, dreaming that one day a child from America and a child from the Soviet Union could play together. He was hardcore in the use of American power. He built up the American military. He walked away at Reykjavik. He was not afraid to give the Soviets a hard and firm no. But he also held out the prospect of peace and a brighter future, a city on a hill. He helped bring the Berlin Wall down and toppled the Soviet Union. He helped de-escalate the Cold War and removed many of the world's nuclear weapons. He was a complex man, to say the least. When he was elected president, he was called a warmonger, and there was fear that he would get us into a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. But as Quaid points out, it took a Cold Warrior like that to win the Cold War. Before that, we had Carter, who was this is not against Carter, what he did in the Middle East with peace with Egypt and Israel. I mean, that was quite an accomplishment and everything. But with the Soviets, we had given away the B-1 bomber. We had appeased them. And America, it's sort of like that speech that Reagan, you were talking about Reagan, that innocence, that we just want to be friends with everybody. That's a natural thing for us to do. We don't see why it couldn't be that way and appeal with reason. But the people in the Soviet Union and Iran, most of the world didn't grow up like we did. You know, it's a very brutal world out there and a very brutal reality. And when America is like that, I think they sort of laugh at us a little bit, or they take advantage of it for sure. They see it as weakness. Shapiro asked Quaid, as someone who has come out in support of Trump recently, to compare and contrast where Trump and Reagan, who are obviously different in many ways, happen to be alike. Well, I think it's more the circumstances of the world right now, Quaid replied. You go back to 1980, 1979, we had the hostages, which nobody talks about. We have hostages right now in the Middle East. I don't know why nobody talks about them. We had that. The economy was in a bad place at the time with gas, oil, a big thing. Inflation was high. A lot of the very same circumstances, I think. In fact, Carter had even made his famous malaise speech that America was in. And Reagan came along and said, no, we're not a nation in decline. We are going up. We are a shining city on a hill, and we're going to get back to that. And people believed him. He inspired people. And that's why he won the presidency, I think. The first couple of years of Reagan's first term were rocky. The economy took a while to recover. And in order to crush inflation, he had to raise interest rates. So prepare for what's coming. By 1982, his popularity was already waning. But in 1983, he surged back, especially after the assassination attempt. And in 1984, he won an enormous victory, winning 49 of the 50 states. He lost only one state, and D.C., and the one state he lost by less than 4,000 votes. When asked if that kind of American unity will ever be even a possibility ever again, pointing to a different era and a different approach where Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill could passionately battle it out politically and then sit down for drinks afterwards, still liking each other as people. Quaid said, they said we're going to be enemies until after like 5 o'clock. Then we're just a couple of Irishmen having a beer. And Tip O'Neill would be at the White House, and at least they had a conversation with each other, back and forth. Also, Reagan was elected in 1980. The hostages, the Iran hostages, were freed like 20 minutes after he took office. Because Iran knew he wasn't going to take anything from them. But he was also special on the economy. Interest rates were 20% at one time. I remember that because I was starting to buy a house. And I think he really won on, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And that question is very similar to what it is now. And it took a couple of years for changes to happen, to see progress in something. It's not going to change overnight as far as inflation and the economic policy that was put into effect. Then, I think he had an extended honeymoon period because of the assassination attempt, which we've just done as well. But once things got going, I think you saw a lot of things like activists from the 60s who had grown up and were now on Wall Street. I guess the Reagan Democrats, you could call them. Things started to change. Even though he no longer lives in Hollywood, let's be honest. Coming out and saying publicly that you're voting for Donald Trump gets you quite a bit of blowback these days. But Quaid says, I have my friends, and our relationship is quite solid with that. And I don't know, there's got to be a conversation. A lot of actors have been told, shut up in Hollywood. Just don't say anything because it's going to affect you getting a job or this. And why is it okay for, say, Michael Douglas to go on talk shows and talk about Biden, and yet you can't be for Trump? That's not the way America works. We got to have a conversation about this. It used to be, even back in Reagan's day, you would have liberal Republicans, you would have conservative Democrats. So the lines weren't so blurred as today's just black and white. And more than anything, we've got to get back to being able to interact with each other. Republicans and Democrats need each other. That's what we don't admit. Because we keep each other from going too far one way or the other. The fringe is taking over. I myself am an independent. I mean, I voted both ways all my life. So I'm not a registered Republican. I wasn't going to vote for Trump either, because I thought things really needed to settle down in this country. And there were a lot of other candidates that I thought would be good. But once the judicial system was used on him, to me, that was messing with our Constitution. And that's not America. And that's what got me back the other way. That I'm definitely voting for him. Because I believe in America and I believe in the Constitution. Preach, Dennis. I think I found my political soulmate, people. If you'll remember, I did a whole podcast on Trump's conviction saying that it was a terrible miscalculation on the part of the far left. I said it would backfire. I said it would actually cause more people to support Trump. It would make more people afraid of these abuses of power affecting them next. And I do think we are seeing that happen, especially among people who don't live online. People who can still remember things that happened a few months ago. When asked if he thought the future of Hollywood was actually going to be independent films, like Reagan, through companies like his own, he said, "When I first came to LA, back in those days, each studio, say 5, would be producing at least 40 movies a year. That's a lot of movies. That's like 200 studio movies that are coming out. And they would be at all places on the spectrum of genres. And today, I think there might be 8, maybe? And those have all got to be big tentpoles because the only way to make money for them is to spend $200 million. So that's really changed. But more than that, I think Hollywood has sort of lost its relevancy with an audience to a certain extent. Very similar to what was going on in the late 60s, that they kind of lost track of who their audience was and who they were. And it took a film like Bonnie and Clyde, that French New Wave, that set off a whole new thing in the 70s to a new golden age, where it was a different kind of filmmaking that hit the audience and actually hit a nerve to what was going on underneath the surface in the country. You started having anti-heroes and the rebel hero come back and all of that. And we're in a very similar place now, that I think Hollywood has lost contact with its audience. But now, that void can be filled from anywhere. Because you can finance a movie from different places, and there's different centers going on now. What Taylor Sheridan is doing now in Texas, and what's going on in Georgia, there's a whole... If I was a young actor today, I wouldn't go to LA. I'd go to Atlanta. Because they're casting smaller roles there. They're not going to fly people from LA. And that's where I'd start. But that's the start of an industry there. Because people are going to wind up living there and moving there. And they're doing quite well. Look, the types of films that people want to see is shifting as well. That is where Hollywood is perhaps most out of step with the rest of mankind. They're making the films they want to see, not the films we want to see. They're not fun. They're sermons wagging a finger at us naughty children for not being as good of a pure person as they are. It gets old fast. This week's clip of Disney's new Snow White film is a perfect example. In the animated movie, Snow White is running for her life, and when she finds the dwarf's cottage, she cleans it for them in the hope that they will let her stay. In this new version, Disney is so focused on making Snow White look like an empowered feminist, a boss chick, that they have her break and enter into the dwarf's home and then make them clean their own house for her. They've become so out of touch with normal people that they are now a parody of themselves. But Reagan sounds like a real film, one worth seeing. Quote, well, for instance, the love story of he and Nancy, it's very central to the movie. Reagan probably wouldn't have been president if it wasn't for Nancy. It was just the strength of their relationship was very rare. The scene that he enjoyed filming the most was the debate between Reagan and Mondale, which is based on my second favorite clip of Reagan. Quote, it was a piece of theater to begin with. He and Mondale had already had the first debate, where Reagan had been kind of loose on the facts and whatever. He just didn't perform well in the first debate. And they were talking about he was too old and this and that. I think he was, 74 at the time or something? So the second debate, he did the famous, he was asked the question, it was a great setup, that I will not, for political purposes, take advantage of my opponent's youth and inexperience, which was fantastic. And even Mondale laughs, okay? He knows he's lost the election with that. But Reagan did something even better. He said that, and then I call it the Jack Benning, he reached over and took his water and took a sip of it. Just to let it breathe. Then it was beautiful. By the way, that is a great clip of Reagan. Even before he says anything, just when he hears the question, he knows he's got him. You see the twinkle in his eye and the grin start to spread across his face. It really was a perfect moment. My favorite clip of Reagan, though, was at a speech a couple of weeks after he was shot. A balloon pops. Most of us, if we had just been shot by an assassin and heard another loud bang, we'd be on the floor crying, probably in a puddle of liquid. But Reagan hardly breaks his rhythm and just looks up briefly and says, "Miss me," before continuing on. You gotta love him. And I have a special fondness for the story his daughter told at his funeral, recalling when her goldfish died when she was a child. Her father, who was such a great orator, gave a beautiful eulogy for her goldfish, describing his glorious life in fish heaven. But he had to stop her from killing the other goldfish because it seemed mean to keep them here on Earth when they could be there. But he made her understand that fish murder is wrong. Eventually, Shapiro asked Quaid about how he got into acting. Well, my dad was a frustrated actor, and my brother got into it first, and he did The Last Detail. I was in high school drama and stuff like that, and he did The Last Detail, and it kind of made me go, wow, you can actually do that. You could actually go there and get a job doing that. And I really fell in love with acting in college. There was a particular teacher that was also my brother's teacher. Cecil Pickett was his name. The great thing about him, it was exactly what I said. It was about what makes people tick. What's on the outside? The way they walk, the way they talk, mannerisms. What causes that? What's the psychological reason that they do that? That leads you to the inside of somebody. So I went out there when I was 20, 21 almost, sent my picture around to every agent and got rejected. I just started calling up casting directors. There'd be this thing in the back of the Hollywood Reporter, films in the future. And it would list the producer and the director and stuff. and the casting director. So I just started calling them up, and I got turned down 8 of 10 times, but 2 of them would see me. Then I went in to see them. Then I'd stare at my shoes for the first couple of interviews until I got used to talking. Then one of them got me an agent. Then I got a job a couple of months after that. But Breaking Away was really the first movie that made things a lot easier for me. And it really connected, I think, with audiences. I really love that movie. It was such a great experience to do it. Peter Yates. It's written by a first-generation Czech, directed by an Englishman, and I think that's what gives the movie its charm, because they saw America better than we did. In that middle part of America. And it really had a charm to it. And it still holds up. I saw it about 4 months ago, and it really still holds up. Reminiscing on the magic of movies in that era, he said, there was a line around the block. You know, audiences smell movies. Or they used to. That was back in the day. You didn't have any social media. There'd just be an advertisement in the newspaper. No television ads or anything like that. I don't know how that happened, but it was kind of magic the way it used to happen. The way how an audience could smell a good movie. When asked about being able to bring a good performance for every take again and again, play a character like Reagan across their whole lifetime, all while filming everything out of sequence, Quaid said, for one thing, you have the luxury of take 2, which we don't have here. Or do we? I don't know. The first time the camera came in on me in the first film, it's quite intimidating. It's really about just learning to be. Be in the scene. I do all the research I can in character development. With Reagan, I wound up having a couple of years, really, before we even started filming, which was great. But, like the voice, the early part of his life, you see him at, like, in Hollywood, in the house of un-American activists. His voice is way up there, and he talks a lot faster. So that's a long way getting to the latter years, where he speaks a little slower, but a little wiser. Which I'm going to play that clip for you guys, because, hey, I can't impersonate Reagan.
Like the voice, in the early part of his life, like you see him in Hollywood at the House of Un-American Activities. His voice is way up there, and it's very, very talks a lot faster, and it's, I believe our system can take it. So that's a long way from getting to the later years where he speaks a little slower but a little wiser. So it's just all.
Yeah. Quaid does it pretty good. I'm not going to make an attempt at it, people. Quaid went on, so it's just all those nuances, and it's little things. Like he had a crooked smile, which had something to do with maybe nerve damage from childhood or whatever. The pathology to it. And he kind of either knowingly, or it may have been unknowingly, they taught you how to walk in Hollywood when you became an actor. The studio system then. You had to have a certain walk. His was very similar to John Wayne, in a way. So little things like that all add up. Then you just have to, in the end, trust it and just dive in. Acknowledging that what is shown in this movie will probably be the most that many people ever know about Reagan, he said, yeah, for sure. That's very important. First off, the movie's meant to entertain. That's what it's supposed to be. For those who are like your age, which would be 40, you get a glimpse into what the country used to be like. And for those like my age, which would be 70, you're reminded of what this country was. And what it still can be, too. It was a great time as a nation for us. And we went through very similar times to push through and become a nation that believed in itself again. That's what I would like to see. For the American people, who I have great faith in, we start believing in ourselves again. And in each other. See? Doesn't Dennis Quaid make normal look good again? I too think that it's possible. I even optimistically think it's likely. We will never be utopia. We just need to remember who we are to get to a good place. And we need to only put people in power who remember who we are too. People who want to get to the same place that we want to go. We need to get back to a place where you can disagree, passionately disagree, and then sit down and have drinks. And stop being a place where families stop speaking to each other because of the way their dad votes. It's not healthy. This divisiveness is not healthy. And all the other issues aside, it's unwise to vote for anyone who's going to make that divisiveness worse. Exclude even more people. America can turn this around. It's not too late, whatever the pessimists say. We can push the fringe out on both sides. The fringe has taken over before. They did it in the 60s. And they've been pushed back out before, like they were in the 80s. We can return to a country of neighbors and communities and simple values. We can stop listening to the media spin and the Hollywood extremists and the political radicals and the uninformed influencers and go back to being what we were, America, which was pretty good. We've done it before, and we can do it again. So let's do it. Thank you for listening to this podcast, and hopefully you will be back next week, as will I. Have a good week, people.